What if I told you that money isn't what you think it is? That the paper in your wallet, the numbers in your bank account, even the so-called digital dollars flying across the internet every second are not real wealth. They're promises. Empty ones. Because once upon a time, every piece of money represented something tangible. Gold, silver, something real. But today, money represents trust. Trust in a system that very few people understand, controlled by institutions that were never elected. This is the story of how central banks quietly replaced gold, the most stable store of value in human history, with something far more fragile: infinite promises. To understand how this happened, we need to go back, not decades, but centuries. Because the idea that money could be backed by nothing didn't happen overnight. It took a series of crises, wars, political deals, and carefully orchestrated shifts in public perception, each one moving humanity further away from real value and deeper into a system where wealth could be created or destroyed by keystrokes. This wasn't just a financial evolution. It was a silent revolution. One that reshaped power, rewrote economies, and made debt the backbone of global prosperity. Origins, the golden promise. For most of history, money was a claim on something real. Ancient merchants used gold and silver because everyone agreed it held value, rare, divisible, and durable. By the 19th century, the world had formalized this relationship through something called the gold standard. Under it, every unit of currency, whether British pounds, French francs, or American dollars, was directly tied to a fixed amount of gold. If you had $1, you could walk into a bank and exchange it for gold. That promise wasn't symbolic, it was enforceable. This system created trust. Governments couldn't print infinite money. Inflation stayed low. Nations were disciplined because every dollar had to be backed by something real. But there was one major problem: gold limited power. You couldn't fight endless wars, fund massive projects, or bail out entire industries without the gold to back it up. And that's where the cracks began to show. The rise of paper power. The early 20th century brought chaos. 2 world wars, a global depression, and an entirely new class of economic thinkers who believed they could outsmart scarcity. In 1913, the United States created the Federal Reserve, a central bank with the authority to manage money supply and credit. It was sold as a stabilizing force, a guardian against panics and collapses. But what it really did was centralize control over money creation, moving it away from gold and toward policy decisions. Then came the World Wars. To finance them, governments printed vast amounts of paper money. Gold reserves couldn't keep up. After each conflict, countries tried to return to the gold standard, but it never fit quite right again. By 1944, the world needed a new system, and they got one: the Bretton Woods Agreement. Under Bretton Woods, the US dollar became the new anchor of global finance, pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. Other nations tied their currencies to the dollar, and in theory, the US promised to redeem dollars for gold if requested. In reality, though, the printing presses didn't stop. By the 1960s, America was spending massively on Vietnam, on social programs, on expansion, and foreign nations began noticing the math didn't add up. The world was flooded with dollars, far more than the gold reserves could cover. The breaking point, 1971. In August 1971, everything changed. President Richard Nixon announced that the US would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. That temporary move has lasted over 50 years. Overnight, the dollar, once a certificate of real value, became a free-floating promise. For the first time in modern history, the global monetary system was backed by nothing. This moment is known as the Nixon shock, and it marked the birth of the modern era of fiat currency, money that has value because governments say it does. But few understood the long-term consequences. Without gold as a constraint, central banks were free to expand the money supply endlessly. Credit exploded, debt soared, and with every new dollar created, the purchasing power of the existing ones quietly eroded. Inflation wasn't an accident, it was baked into the system. The fallout. Money without limits. The decades that followed saw an economic transformation unlike anything in history. In the 1980s, deregulation and cheap credit fueled booms. In the 1990s, financialization turned markets into casinos. By the 2000s, central banks had learned the ultimate trick. When the system shakes, just print more money. The 2008 financial crisis exposed the fragility of a world built on promises. Banks had created mountains of synthetic debt instruments, bets upon bets upon bets, all resting on the assumption that credit never dies. When it all collapsed, central banks stepped in with quantitative easing, a polite phrase for injecting trillions of new dollars into the system. The illusion was saved, but at a cost. The gap between real wealth and printed wealth grew larger than ever. From 2008 to 2020, the US money supply more than quadrupled. Then came COVID, and within 2 years, central banks printed more money than in the previous 5 decades combined. Gold didn't disappear, but its role as the ultimate anchor was gone. In its place stood digital numbers, central bank balance sheets, and an ever-growing mountain of global debt, now exceeding $315 trillion. That's 3 times the size of the entire global economy. Failed fixes, politicians and economists promised they could manage this new system through interest rates, monetary tools, and fiscal policy. But each fix created more instability. Lowering rates made borrowing cheaper, but also made asset bubbles inevitable. Printing money propped up markets, but hollowed out the middle class. And every time the system faltered, the solution was the same. Print more, promise more, inflate more. The world's central banks became the ultimate puppet masters, not because they control gold, but because they control belief. And now, as we move into a digital age, the next evolution is already on the horizon. Central bank digital currencies, programmable money that could extend this control into every transaction, every account, every citizen. The promises are infinite, but so are the consequences. Modern parallels. Look around today. Inflation quietly erodes savings, while stock markets hit record highs. Governments run record deficits with no path to repayment. And global central banks still hold meetings every few months to decide, arbitrarily, what your money should be worth. Sound familiar? It's the same story repeating, only this time there's no gold left to return to. According to the IMF, over 97% of the world ES money now exists only in digital form, entries on ledgers controlled by banks. And behind it all lies the same illusion, that debt equals wealth, that promises equal value, that trust equals truth. But history tells us, when promises pile too high, they eventually collapse under their own weight. So what can we learn from this hidden transformation? Takeaway 1. Real value doesn't come from what S printed, it comes from what S scarce. Whether that's gold, land, or productive labor, true wealth has to be rooted in something real. Takeaway 2. Every monetary system eventually reflects its incentives. A system built on debt will always demand more debt. The moment money became infinite, responsibility became optional. Takeaway 3. Trust is the real currency, and it's running thin. When people stop believing in the promises, systems built on illusion start to crumble. We are living through the long tail of a decision made in 1971, a quiet replacement of gold with infinite promises. And while the illusion still holds, cracks are spreading. Because the more we print, the more we owe. and the less our money truly means.